world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Israel sends 2 cargo planes to evacuate its football fans from the Netherlands. This after the Israeli fans were brutally assaulted by pro-Palestine demonstrators in Amsterdam, leaving several hospitalized. Mozambique's police officials opened fire at anti-government protesters in the capital, Maputo. Human rights groups say at least 18 people protesting against the October 9th election results have been killed. Nigeria accuses neighboring Niger and Mali of sending armed militia into the West African country. Abuja says the influx of militant groups has increased since the 2023 military coup in Niger. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol apologizes to the nation for the controversies surrounding his wife. President Yoon's wife has been accused of accepting a luxury Dior handbag and participating in stock manipulation. And a new British report estimates that artificial intelligence will replace at least 3 million jobs within a decade. The study says that jobs involving clerical work, data crunching, banking, and customer service would be most impacted. Hello and welcome. We begin in Mauritius. Keeping up with the election season across the world, the East African island nation of Mauritius is set to hold elections this Sunday. A country of 1.3 million people will be holding its legislative elections on the 10th of November. Mauritius is a parliamentary democracy and conducts elections every 5 years. While it has largely been one of Africa's biggest success stories owing to its relatively stable democracy, this year's elections are coming in the backdrop of several controversies and major political events. In Mauritius, the elections are being held for its unicameral National Assembly. Now, the unicameral is when the parliament consists of just one house in parliament. A total of 70 seats are up for grabs in the National Assembly, out of which 62 are directly elected members to the Assembly, while 8 others are appointed members to balance out representation. More than 1 million people are registered to vote in the 12th legislative election in Mauritius since independence. After the elections are held, the National Assembly appoints the President and the Vice President, who each serve a 5-year term. The President then appoints the Prime Minister from the party or coalition that holds the majority in the unicameral National Assembly. Now, being a parliamentary democracy, the President is largely a ceremonial head in Mauritius, with the real executive power being in the hands of the Prime Minister. Now, ever since its independence from the British in 1968, there have been mostly just 3 families that have held the corridors of power. They also lead the most dominant political parties in the country. First is Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth. He inherited the premiership from his father when he died in 2017. He later won by a wide margin at the 2019 election as head of the Militant Socialist Movement, or the MSM. The next candidate standing in the election is Navin Ramgoolam. Now, he belongs to the Labour Party, which is a part of the Coalition Alliance of Change. Now, Ramgoolam is himself a former premier and the son of the country's first leader. The third major party is the Mauritian Militant Movement, which is led by Paul Berenguer, who has also previously been the Prime Minister of Mauritius. Now, Berenguer's party, however, is currently a part of the Alliance of Change coalition. Apart from these three major political parties, there are several more parties that are contending the elections on the 10th of November, including a new party called the Linian Reform Alliance that is campaigning under the slogan, "Neither Navin nor Pravind." Now, the 2024 legislative elections are being fought on several key issues. Some of the prominent ones include the rising corruption in the country, growing politicization of government institutions, prevalence of nepotism, the existence of unemployment, gender inequality, and issues of civil liberty. However, the 2024 elections might be remembered not for the issues that it was fought on, but rather the controversies and major political victories that surrounded it. In the lead-up to the elections, the country was engulfed in a shocking wiretapping scandal just last month. Reports indicated that about 20 phone conversations of politicians, journalists, civil society members, and even foreign diplomats had been recorded and leaked online. The wiretapping scandal had prompted Prime Minister Jugnauth to order internet service providers to block access to the most widely used social networks, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. The ban on social media led several opposition parties to condemn the government's move. They called the ban a political maneuver to avoid defeat in the November 10th elections. After widespread condemnation, the ban was reversed last week in embarrassment for the government. The ban was initially due to last until the 11th of November, a day after the elections were held. Moreover, this controversy stoked fears that rights were eroding in Mauritius. Mauritius last month slipped from the top spot to second place in the latest Ibrahim Index, which monitors governance across the African continent. Speaking at a rally in the capital city of Port Louis last week, opposition leader Navin Ramgoolam had also criticized the government for curbing freedom and promised a change in Mauritius.
My mission is to restore freedom to Mauritians, to give our country back its reputation, and to return your rights to you.
But while the scandal rocked Mauritius, there was also a political victory that was being celebrated within the country. Last month, in a historic deal, the former colonizer Britain relinquished sovereignty of the remote Chagos Islands to Mauritius, following a long-running legal dispute. The deal came as a major success for the government, even if it meant that Britain retaining a lease to keep a joint U.S. military base on the island of Diego Garcia for an initial 99 years, while members of the Chagosian community protested against the deal. But with the elections now looming over Mauritius, the big question remains, will Prime Minister Jugnauth be able to retain his majority? Or will the anti-incumbency change the tide in the island country? To discuss more on this, we have with us Musa Mdunge, a political analyst who is joining us live from Dundee in the UK. Thank you for being with us, Musa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, how has this wiretapping scandal influenced public opinion and the political landscape in the lead-up to these elections? And what are the main issues that voters are prioritizing in light of these revelations?
Well, you know, Alyson, I mean, one of the things that you've captured so well is the issue of rising corruption. That has been a really huge problem for Mauritius since 2019. And this is a specific concern given the type of economy that Mauritius has. It's really built a reputation, certainly in terms of Africa, as being a leader in terms of the service and financial sector and being a tax haven. And that has drawn a lot of investment within the country that has been much needed for the development of the country and its economy. And so for voters, linked to the issue of the economy is this issue of corruption. But further than that, is the issue of the freedom of expression, the freedom of association, of political association and beliefs, the rights and freedoms that are critical for any functioning democracy or any country that would want to see itself as a strong sort of investment haven. And so for people in Mauritius, this is definitely a huge issue for them, particularly when you consider, the recent events of the kind of police brutality that has been reported, as well as when you think of the kind of abuse and suppression that has been experienced by journalists in the country, which then acts as an impediment in the ability of people to access the kind of information they need to make the right decisions in terms of their interests when it comes to Sunday's poll. So for many people, the issue of corruption has been central.
Absolutely. And Musa, what impact has the social media ban excuse me, has the social media ban had on political campaigns, voter outreach, and overall public discourse, especially in terms of the information dissemination and civic engagement in the run-up to these elections?
Well, look, the social media ban is quite huge for a country like Mauritius, where about 85 to 88% of the population receive their news from social media and are quite engaged in social media. And so the very fact that you would remove such a critical source of information, therefore speaks to the impediments towards those rights to information, right, which are very critical for voters to make informed decisions about elections in a time where so much is being questioned about where people get their information, the role of AI, right, in terms of the authenticity of the information people receive, and also the agenda that governments as well as at times corporates and media have in terms of shaping public discourse. And so for a country like Mauritius, where media has really over the past few years seen a huge growth in terms of its importance, it's quite interesting to see how people's views, even on the quality in terms of social media, in terms of its freedom, has happened. So if you look at data from the Afrobarometer survey that was done this year, in 2020, you had 69% of the population that believed that, the media and social media was somewhat free versus 29% in 2020. All of a sudden in 2024, Alyson, to show you how serious this issue is, only 52% still believe it is somewhat free. And the number that moved from believing that it was not free, which was 29%, has moved up to 46%. So you can see that half of the population believe that media freedom, including in terms of social media, has certainly decreased over the past few years under the current administration, which entered power in 20.
Right. And Musa, on that, are there concerns from human rights groups or international observers regarding the fairness and transparency then of the upcoming election, given the wiretapping scandal and the restrictions imposed on social media platforms?
Well, there's certainly been, some sort of international criticism or concern, certainly from observers. If you think of the European Union, you think of the Americans who have a vested interest or from the United Kingdom in terms of how these elections are going to be held, but also the state of the decay in terms of democratic institutions in Mauritius since 2019. This is a country, that moved from being described as a very stable, open democracy to an electoral autocracy. And that speaks to some of the risks that are being observed by international civil organizations around these elections and around the state of democracy in terms of Mauritius, which, by the way, is a very, very important country and will continue to play a very strategic, important role if you think about the geopolitical battles that are happening between China and the United States in terms of the Indo-Pacific region. So there'll be of vested interest in these elections, but given, as you said in the beginning of this conversation, this is a country that has been governed by three dynastic families, essentially. And as long as great powers will the benefits that they want from it, it is unlikely that any international criticism will lead to any far-reaching change.
Right. Musa, as always, great to speak with you. Thank you for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Shifting focus now to an ongoing conflict in Africa, not involving nations of the continent, but foreign players who are vying for influence in the continent. In the latest, the United Kingdom has targeted the Russian war machine in Africa by announcing a new wave of sanctions. The Keir Starmer-led Labour government, which took charge earlier this year, has expanded sanctions against Russia's military-industrial complex and Russian-backed mercenary groups, particularly which operate in Africa. Britain is imposing 56 new sanctions in its latest package against Russia, which is the UK's largest since May last year. The sanctions are on 3 private mercenary groups with links to the Kremlin, including the Africa Corps, which is the rebranded Wagner Group. It also targets 11 individuals associated with Russian proxies. Now, London says that all of these targets have direct links to the Kremlin and have threatened peace and security in Libya, Mali, and the Central African Republic, and have committed widespread human rights abuses across the continent. With this, the UK says it has now become the first G7 country to directly sanction Russia's Africa Corps. Apart from Russia, the latest action also targets entities based in China, Turkey, and Central Asia, which are involved in the supply and production of goods, including machine tools, microelectronics, and components for drones. The UK says these measures are to restrict support for Russia amid its war with Ukraine, but also to counter its activities globally. Britain's announcement came ahead of the European Political Community Summit in Hungary's capital, Budapest, where UK Prime Minister Starmer discussed efforts to combat Russian aggression. These sanctions also come days after the UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, concluded his maiden tour of Africa with the aim of resetting relations with the 54-nation continent. The leader visited the UK's former colonies of Nigeria and South Africa as a part of the tour. Britain, which was the second biggest colonial power in Africa after France, continues to play sort of big brother role in the continent. However, that role is now changing. Before embarking on the visit, Britain's Foreign Secretary vowed a new approach for Africa that includes more listening rather than telling. During the visit, he also expressed the UK's support for a permanent UNSC seat for Africa.
The UK has had a long-standing position that Africa must be represented on the UN Security Council. And I'm keen to better understand if the recent position is supported by other members of the Security Council, particularly Russia and China, that have been a block on the UN Security Council's expansion in the past, which has not been the UK position. We have been supportive now for many, many years.
The UK's role in Africa in the past decade has declined significantly. The UK's Africa policy has long focused on development aid, But even this has seen a decline in recent years as the former colonizer faces its own economic crisis. However, experts in the UK encourage boosting ties with the youngest continent, while the European nation experiences aging population. Though the new UK government seeks to reboot Africa ties, many other players have entered the continent. While China has become the largest trade partner of many African nations, Russia is increasingly making inroads with boosting its military presence, especially in the western parts of the continent and in the Sahel region. The United States and France have been gradually withdrawing soldiers and weapons from the region amid growing anti-West sentiment. So while the Starmer-led government is stepping its efforts to counter Russia in Africa up, it is yet to be seen how effective its strategy would be and whether Africa is willing to open its doors to a former colonizer, particularly as Vladimir Putin's popularity continues to grow in the continent. And moving on, the European nations are seeking cooperation with African nations due to another reason: immigration. After the UK's Rwanda deportation failure, more European nations have come up with similar plans. In the latest, Germany has struck a deportation pact with Somalia. Under the deal, Germany will deport undocumented Somali immigrants back to the East African nation. This comes after Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud met the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz earlier this week. The leaders have agreed to boost the number of deportations of Somali migrants without legal status. A total of 65,000 Somalis live currently in Germany, and Chancellor Scholz said that the pact will only affect a handful of people convicted of serious crimes. While the Somali government has agreed to receive the migrants, it also urged Germany against forced deportation. The Somali government spokesperson said that during the talks in Berlin, the Somali leader told Scholz that there is no need for forced deportations, but those deemed illegal are welcome to be part of Somalia's progress. Somalia, the Horn of Africa nation, which is reeling from al-Shabaab terrorism for nearly 2 decades, has seen a growing number of people migrating to Europe. As per the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, Frontex, Somali nationals were among the most detected this September at Europe's eastern land migratory route. The agreement with Somalia is part of Germany's efforts to increase deportations and to seek formal readmission agreements with countries of origin of the migrants. Germany has also signed such deals with other African nations like Morocco and Kenya. While Germany is sending migrants back to the country of origin, other European nations have made efforts to deport migrants to a third nation. Last month, Italy became the first nation to deport migrants to a third nation, Albania. Then the Netherlands said it is in talks with Uganda to deport illegal migrants. While going through a massive back and forth, the UK's plan to deport migrants to Rwanda met an ill fate with a change in government in late July of this year. Now, immigration has become a subject of heated political debate in Europe, and nations are exploring ways to tackle the challenge as anti-immigrant parties gain popularity across the continent. They are forging harsher policies to fight the crisis. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has said that the leaders have discussed setting up deportation centres outside of the EU's borders, calling them return hubs. It is not clear which nations are a part of Europe's deportation plans, but the previous attempts show a preference for low-income nations which will receive European funds to accept the deportations. But critics have raised concerns over the plan, with many calling it racist and inhumane, while others point out that it infringes people's right to asylum. African nations have so far been the major site for such return hub plans. As per reports, Europe remains the leading destination for African migrants. So as the continent adopts a stricter stance against migration, African nations brace for impact. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Our next story comes from Senegal, where kickboxing is kicking and punching its way into the West African country's sporting culture. Despite a lack of adequate resources and infrastructure, interest in kickboxing, especially among the youth, has climbed by nearly 300%. The sport has also gained popularity among young women and girls. However, it has been difficult for Senegal's Kickboxing Federation to support their athletes financially. But that is not stopping the people from joining kickboxing. Our next report gets you all the details.
In a country where football, basketball and wrestling are considered the most popular sports, Senegal is now seeing the emergence of a new sporting interest: kickboxing. The sport was introduced in the West African country 30 years ago, but it is now developing a following in the nation, driven by a handful of enthusiasts who are tirelessly working hard despite the lack of resources and training facilities. And driving the mania is Senegal's new world kickboxing champion, Mohamed Tafsir Ba. In a dilapidated room of military barracks, he spends hours practicing, smashing uppercuts into the punching bag. And delivering punches at a dizzying speed. This has been the punishing regime that helped Ba win the 90-kilogram category at the World Association of Kickboxing Organizations, or the WAKO World Cup event in Uzbekistan in September.
I just want to show that as a Senegalese training here, you can become a legend. You can become a world champion, an African champion. You don't have to end up doing bad things, being on the street. You don't have to become a kingpin or be sent to the streets. You can succeed in this country just by believing in it and working a lot harder to succeed. This is where the national team trains. The mats aren't really suited to what we do. The punching bags are a bit old, but we manage. But you can get hurt even hitting the bag, so it's not easy at all. We try to manage, to control, and to do well without hurting ourselves.
Yet the lack of adequate infrastructure and resources has not deterred the young people, including the Senegalese women, from taking part in the sport. In the women's competition at the WAKO World Cup event, Ba's compatriot, Indie Khadi Diallo, won a second consecutive silver in the lightweight 60-kilogram class. Speaking about her love for kickboxing, she reflected on how her journey was not a cakewalk.
It's not very easy to do this sport as a woman. There are a lot of women who refuse to practice this sport. In my neighborhood, I'm often called a man, but I don't care. All I know is that I love kickboxing and I want to give it everything I've got.
Taking inspiration from Diallo are several more girls who want to join the sport and represent a country where violence against women and girls remains a prominent issue. Moreover, the fitness and mental training that kickboxing requires has attracted several youth to pick up the gloves.
Young people, even girls, are starting to join kickboxing clubs. Quite simply, I think that because it's a contact sport, there are a lot of physical and mental aspects to it, and a lot of things that make young people join kickboxing clubs.
Reports suggest that between 2022 and now, the Kickboxing Federation has seen membership numbers climb by 300%. But funds are tight for supporting the athletes. The Senegalese Kickboxing Federation survives on a budget of around $2,000 annually. Yet it's making efforts to attract new athletes to the sport. The federation has slashed the prices of kickboxing licenses to just $5, down from $16.
We put in place a 5-year strategic plan in 2021, aiming that we would succeed in becoming world champions in 5 years. The plan was for 5 years, and we've achieved it in 3, because we also gave ourselves the means. We have a lot of internal contributions, but we also have our own resources which we use. Our cash flow comes first and foremost from our own pockets. As you know, it's not easy. We're in a developing country.
With kickboxing now garnering interest in Senegal, the federation hopes that the positive results at the World Championships will help the sport attract more sponsors and increase its revenues so that a newer generation of athletes can be trained.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and goodbye.